Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening if you're tuning in from Europe or the Middle East or India. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I'd also like to thank the expert panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to help us out with these panels. Today's panel is a subject that we were just talking before the show started, ladies and gentlemen, near and dear to everybody's heart. It is excellent safety equals excellent business performance. Yes, but is it cause or just correlation? And if I can, I'd also like to add, although I didn't put it in the title of the conference or the webinar session, but the subtext is also, or do they even care? And I don't mean that to be sounding overly cynical or negative, but it certainly is part of the conversation that we're going to get to. You know, in other words, it works for me, and I don't necessarily care why it works, and you know, I'm just going to move on. But let me just read the description here, and then I'm going to introduce the panelists to you, and then we're going to get going with the questions. So every manager knows that good safety equals good business because incidents and injuries cost money. But some senior managers and executives believe that excellent safety equals excellent business performance. They have shifted their thinking towards the concept of high reliability, which by definition addresses the need to manage human error proactively. However, when pressed for an explanation, very few can explain the cause-effect relationship. What is much more common is that they have developed a belief in the correlation. In other words, as I mentioned before, it worked for me before, or at the last plant, the last division, or the last company I was in charge of, so I'm doing it again. I don't know exactly why, I just know it works. And as I explained to the panelists, or we were discussing before the show started, my personal experience with talking to plant managers, you know, 400 or 500 of them in the last 30 years is fairly extensive. But it's also just my experience. And, you know, I've had lots of them sort of look at me and say, hey, you know, it works for me and I'm doing it again. But like I said in the session, if you press them for cause versus correlation, it's really not something that they've delved right into the gear works of or got at the granular level, granular level, excuse me. Anyhow, so let me carry on. The people on the panel all work at very large companies that have excellent safety performance. They can tell us what they think in terms of cause versus correlation, and we're going to get that from everybody very quickly. They can tell us what they think their executives and plant managers think. Obviously, they don't know for sure, but you know, they can tell us what they think, and they can also tell us what they think their supervisors and their employees believe about all of this. Obviously, that doesn't mean they're always right or that you have to agree with them. But we're definitely going to get in some new paradigms, give you some new things to think about. And we want to have a good, if you will, 15, 20 minutes for questions from the audience that you can either ask specifically to one of the panelists or to the panel in general. And, you know, we can all try to see if we can come up with answers for you. So let me quickly, I know you've, if you're tuning in or if you've tuned in before, you've met some of the panelists before, but David Bianca is a Senior Director of Health, Safety, Environment for Epiroc. They are a global company that produces drilling and mining equipment. I'll let David tell you just, you know, 30-second speech, elevator speech about Epiroc. Alex Carnival is the Chief Performance Officer at ETEX, but Alex has had numerous other senior management positions at large Fortune 500 companies. And my voice on these webinars, I tell you. Peter Petroni, Senior Health Safety Environmental Director for American Electric, or AES. And just recently, Peter has come and started working with us as a senior consultant with SafeStart. Dr. Wada Ghanem is the Senior Director of Sustainability, Operational, and Business Excellence at Emirates National Oil Company. He also has a consulting business, and I'm sorry, Wada, I can't remember Robert's last name right now. I believe Robert is also a Canadian, but they do a lot of consulting work with both public and private, very large companies in the UK and Europe, advising their boards of directors, who then obviously set the direction and tone for the CEO, COO, and CFO of the company. And Dr. Wada and Alex were both with me just a couple days ago when we were discussing key performance indicators that get senior management attention and action. So these two are a bit tied together in terms of when you actually get to the cause, if you're talking with those folks. And then if you've tuned in before, Teg Matthews is our Vice President, Business Development. Teg is running focus groups, 50, 60 leading companies in North America. They get together about once every couple of weeks or once a month. Now, they haven't actually discussed this topic per se, but as you said, Teg, you've talked around it a bit. So Teg's job is to sum up what all of the panelists have said, and also, if he can, to try to provide a bit of that collective perspective. And I'm not supposed to talk very much, but we all know that's difficult. But I'm going to at least try to chime in terms of what we've heard from the expert panels in India. Dr. Wada's been with me on some of those. The ones in Europe, David and Alex have been with me on almost all of those. So we'll try to also give you the perspective from those panels as well. So if I can, David, let me just start with you. You know, the elevator speech about Epiroc, because it is like every country in the world where they're doing mining. So either operations or field servicing your equipment. And then your perspective on what your leadership thinks, cause or correlation. I've met some of them, so I've got I've got a bit of a personal opinion myself, but not too long, David. Just let's get everybody to sort of say what they think the leaders they met think in terms of cause or correlation. We'll go around fairly quickly, and then I'll come back to you and get the why and the background and the depth. So what do you think? Did they think cause, correlation? And if you gently, you can also say, I don't know if they care, because that is part of the conversation.
Well, I know they care. The question is, do they care which it is? And so Epiroc's worldwide, 15,000 or so employees. I'm in the surface mining division, which is involved in surface mining all over the world. And so it's a great question, because I think the correlation piece, I think, is a known and somewhat of a given. What we're learning, though, is what is business performance, though? I mean, and I'm going to talk about this when I go have a little more time. What does business performance mean these days? It means new things, not just dollar signs. It means sustainability. It means recruitment, getting people in a company because of your culture and those kind of things. So these are aspects that you can really have an effect. And when you start talking effect, now you're talking cause. And I think they see it going in that direction.
Okay, David, very well said. And so, Alex, same question again. And just if you could, brief brief bit about ETEX for those folks who maybe don't know? Building
Sure.
products all over the world, but yeah, and then
Yeah, I'll
the
try to.
cost
Yeah, I'll try to stay
correlation.
as sharp as. No problem, Dave. Larry, I'll try to stay as sharp as David was. You know, geographically very similar to what David said. We're about the same size, 14,000 employees, and basically all over the world, from Europe, South America, Africa, Asia. And what's important to know, as you said, it's building materials, a couple different major business lines. What I think is important for this conversation is, you know, ETEX isn't really homogeneous in terms of every site and every region having the same level or maturity. So you'd see differences, not just because being in the different regions, but also because of how the business came into the company, some through acquisition, some that have been there 100 years. So, I mean, I'd echo what David said. I think everybody believes in correlation. I think there's a constant belief that if you're a well-run company, you're probably doing well in safety. So yes, I think everybody sort of sees it from correlation. And I think there's a, you know, everybody has a little bit of believement in the cause, but as David said, it's very hard to really see which people have religion from it and truly believe in it. And my take, and again, we can talk on more details later, is the leaders on every level that do have that passion, that do believe it's causal, they're the ones that have done the work, not just in understanding your outputs for business performance, but actually going in and understanding your inputs for business performance. What drives it, whether it's cost or yield, et cetera. And if you really understand what drives your performance for your company, for your business, for your plant, then the causality of driving safety starts to become much more clear. So I'll leave it there for now, and we can talk details later on.
Well, yeah, and just before we got going with the broadcast, you said something about it. I think for a lot of them, it starts with correlation, that they know that, they believe that. It maybe migrates eventually to cause, but obviously the other thing I said is if they aren't that concerned and they can't get into the gear works of everything, and that's a realistic if you don't want to get into it too. But never mind. Let me go, Dr.
The other way I'd say it, Larry, sorry. The other way I'd say it is that correlation is somewhat passive. You can observe correlation. Cause, you have to be active. You have to do the work to figure out the causes.
Well, or once you do, obviously the idea that you could push on the lever and get more is right in front of you and it's apparent. If it's correlation, then you end up with a bit more of what I call the flag waving, the trumpet blaring, and the safety parade thing. It's important, but we don't exactly know why to push on this lever or that lever. So we tend to do a much more blanket, you know, shotgun approach type of thing to it. Anyhow, like I said, this is near and dear to my heart, but I'm supposed to be the moderator, not a panelist. So, Dr. Wada, I can't wait to get to you talk here. You get to work with a lot of senior executives, boards of directors, in addition to your role at Enoch. So without overstating the obvious, the title is Senior Director, Sustainability, Operational, and Business Excellence. Would think that the group at Enoch is probably leaning, you know, much more, I would hope anyhow with that, much more towards cause and correlation, but maybe just start from Enoch and take it from there in terms of expanding it to your consulting businesses and some of the other companies you work with as well, if you'd like.
Okay, thanks, Larry. Good to join you here. Good evening, good night, actually, from from Dubai. Well, I mean, from actually, Larry, my role has changed once again. So I'm Senior Director of Logistics and Marine Assurance now. So I get an opportunity to do something a bit different. It's quite enjoyable so far. Long story, which we're not going to get into, but anyway. In terms of correlation, it's interesting. This is a very good subject to understand, and linking it to what Alex mentioned about causality. In previous maybe discussions and panels, I talked about the bow tie and the links between the trajectory of how an incident actually occurs, and in that trajectory we have certain barriers which prevent that incident from happening. And then if the incident does happen, then to prevent escalation, there are barriers actually to prevent the escalation of the incident. So understanding the left and right hand side of the bow tie, and this is where I think a lot of senior leaders may not fully understand this question of the barriers, because incidents are gonna occur now, regardless if you believe in the natural accident theory or the high reliability theory. It's all related, because you have to have barriers, because you always have faults. It's because you have so many things happening. So when we now discuss correlation, you can have a correlation between something happening and something else happening. So correlation actually in statistical terms talks about you have a set of data, and well, two sets of data, and then you correlate those two sets of data together, and then you find that they are correlated. So there's a link between them. So it could be a positive correlation or negative correlation. Positive correlation is basically one goes up, so your business becomes better, you make more profitability, and your safety performance improves if you've got some improvement, or vice versa. There's an inverse correlation with safety incidents going down and the profitability going up. And it becomes a bit more complicated in statistics, because we start studying things called moderating factors and mediating factors between these correlated terms. However, I just want to say one thing, that correlations sometimes they might appear mathematically, but they're actually not correlated. They're not linked. So certain organizations, they would have and that's why it's very important to know what sets of data you're correlating one against the other. And we'll discuss more about that. I don't take too much time, but I want to tell you a little story to just bring this case to point. One of them, in cartoons, they always show you when there is a baby to be delivered, right? Who delivers the baby? Who delivers the baby, Larry?
The mother.
No.
The dog.
Stork.
The stork bird,
Right.
right? Remember the stork bird. So what the hell has the stork bird got to do with delivering babies? Right? Have you ever wondered why?
No.
Have you ever wondered why? No. Okay, I'll tell you why. Because somewhere in the Nordic countries, I don't know if it's in Norway or whatever, what used to happen is that at a certain time of the year, you've got these birds migrating from the north to the, I don't know, the south or somewhere else, and they stop over in these Nordic countries at around a certain time of the year, usually around about spring, where it's still bloody cold up there. You'd know that because you're from Canada, man. So around, and these birds would hang around, and they would go to the warmest place on houses, which is next to the chimney. That's why in the cartoons they show you these stork birds delivering the babies through the chimney, like Father Christmas, right? So,
Right.
but why delivering babies? What has that got to do with it? I'll tell you why. Because during the time of the springtime, if you go back, March, April, May, when the kids are actually being delivered, and a lot of kids, there's a big boom in a lot of kids being born at that time. And the reason for that is because it gets pretty dark very quickly around October time, right? So you see the relationship now.
Yeah, the storks.
Between,
the birds are migrating when the babies are getting born, and so they have the storks delivered.
So there's a fantastic and a very strong correlation between the babies and the storks. Yeah, so it's a good positive correlation. But actually, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So sometimes, I would say that you can look at certain data, and if you were very, very clever and you wanted to impress a board of directors, you could take sets of data and show them how they're correlated with safety performance. But the reality is they may have nothing to do with it. So I just wanted to say that point.
Well, no, and that's also like the, in more modern terms, the Hawthorne effect, sort of is, a more modern version of the stork effect, I guess. Okay, Pete, let me get to you again. when you were at AES, which not long ago, what would you say cause, correlation? Feel free to say whether or not there would have been, apathy or concern as well to chase it down any further than that. But give us the 40,000-foot view, if you will, and we're going to come back to you for the depth as soon as we can. Pete, did you go away?
I think we just lost Pete.
Yeah.
Well, how very timely. Just when he his turn to talk, I must say. Well, now, Tag. Well, Tag, now you're right. Now you've got to sum up what Pete didn't say. That's going to be really challenging. I mean, you've been good at the summing up, but this ought to really push it.
Larry, was that correlated to you, or was it a cause? So.
Yeah, tell us a bit though, Tag. When you're talking with the focus groups, folks out there, what would I mean, in general? I mean, obviously, we're not holding you to any kind of decimal point accuracy here, but what's their feeling?
Okay, I think there's several different ways you can answer that question. Actually, the first thing, certainly with the focus groups, there's this general recognition that good safety means good business, means a profitable business, means a successful business. I mean, that is understood at a very high level by everyone. So to go back to what is common, is it true correlation, or is it just, I think if you ask 90% of the leaders around, they would go, yeah, good safety means good business. And some organizations, to look back to something that Alex said, there's a passion about some of these leaders about how they talk about things, and they bring that passion through the way they communicate about it, and it makes it particularly strong, right? And very, very clear, which obviously makes that easier. The difficulty I think that a lot of organizations face, and people face actually, is that they understand it intellectually quite often, but it's almost like they can't quite believe it, or they can't quite put it into very practical kind of terms. So and when you talk to these organizations, they'll just say, we focus on safety because it's good for our business in general. But then when you start digging a little bit deeper, you find that there's kind of disconnects in that. And it's difficult to say why. In some organizations, is the way the systems are applied. In some organizations, it's that human interface with those systems, and I think that's where a lot of organizations sometimes, well, they struggle. So it's a cultural question, really, and so there's that kind of there's a little bit deeper than surface level, but there's that belief on an intellectual level. When you start drilling down into it, from a practical perspective, people don't really know what it looks like unless they have that leadership with that passion that makes it crystal clear, and it goes out through the organization, and then suddenly all this stuff becomes much easier. Many years ago, I did some work with an organization, and they actually put a dollar amount on it actually, and I always wanted to have the work actually, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like every dollar they put into safety gave them $13 in profit back, right? So and so you talk about correlation and measuring it, they looked at it that way. It would have been quite an interesting exercise to look at if they'd done exactly the same thing with quality or other pieces that went with that. But it plays into this an organization that's good at safety is usually good at discipline, by which I mean all sort of procedural discipline and those sort of
Still though, Tag, if you're looking at a unit of measurement like a dollar, then you're still looking at an aggregate measurement, not a specific, if you will, a specific lever that you can then push more, right? In other words, I can throw more money at it, but eventually exactly where does that money go to high yield to low yield investments or activities is still the uncertain part. I just know, it's like government. I'll just throw money at the problem, but exactly how you fix that problem, unless you know the cause, and we've all seen the government throw money at stuff that never got anywhere. Anyhow, Pete, thanks for making it back. Don't know if your internet cut out. when you were at American Electric, which wasn't too long ago, would in general cause or correlation with the management group? Obviously there's another area, which is, I had somebody die in my shift, and from a very deep personal moral conviction point of view, I never want to have it happen again. So I'll do whatever I can for safety, even though I don't exactly know which thing would be the best to do, cause versus correlation. But feel free, just give us the overall viewpoint. But I want to make sure we get back to you for the depth too.
Okay, thanks, Larry, and sorry for cutting out there.
Oh well,
I think the correlation is obvious. Everybody's brought it up, and thanks again for having me going last. It's really tough to answer after Alex and David and Dr. Wada and Teg have spoken. But I'll tell you what I think. From a executive senior leadership, not only at AES but a lot of global companies, I think that the savvy leaders know that there is a cause for safety, and between safety and other decision-making processes, other investment thought processes, and good business outcome. I think that the answer, if you look at a global company, and I think Dr. Wada, the others that have had have global responsibilities would agree that the answer may differ as you start to cascade down through the organization. Some businesses may have a long run of very good safety performance and very good business performance, but one or the other may be due to luck. And it's the savvy leaders that kind of see the cause, the cause and effect relationship between good decision making, from leaders, from individuals, and good business outcome, all good business outcomes, financial, quality, production, and safety. That's when businesses can start to mature as an organization. So, I know it's kind of a muddled answer to your question, but I think the answer is really both. Some businesses, it's correlation. Some businesses, there's a strong cause and effect relationship, and it's the mature businesses that understand and apply the causes, whether it's good decision making, sound investment strategies, those types of things across the board, when they really start to gain momentum and start getting value from that question that you posed.
Very
That
good.
makes
Very
sense.
good. Yeah, well, and I was also just thinking too, again, my own experience is, obviously colors this a lot, but I had there's a company, another global company. They have, I think, 74,000 employees, but 150 some odd locations, operating places. And he was telling me that they were #1 for operating efficiency now after SafeStart. They were #1 for safety, he said, but that didn't get any of the managers' attention. But when he said we're #1 for operating efficiency, he said, you heard 170 notebooks open at once. And he asked me, he said, like, you had gold, silver, and copper in this mine. Why did you decide to mine the copper? And like I said to you guys before, my answer was, well, because I was in the copper business. But so I'm not saying I saw all of the cause like as clearly as I should have either right off the bat for a lot of these things. But again, I was trying to solve a specific safety problem, and I didn't realize that in the process, you're also gonna, like, you're not trying to make quality mistakes either. You're not trying to make reliability mistakes. So, and nobody's ever trying to get hurt. So you need something that can hurt you, hazard or hazardous energy, and somehow you got to come in contact with it. But you wouldn't do that on purpose, so it's most likely going to be an error. But putting all of that together for, if you reduce human error, you're going to reduce safety, quality, and all the rest of it, not nearly as definitively as we should have been. And then when I start talking to the managers about it, I was like, oh, I don't think I think they get the correlation. I don't know at all that they're getting the cause. And I'm getting a few indications that, I don't really care. I don't have time to get into the gearworks of everything. So David, let me get back to you with if you will, the depth or the specifics or the how at Epiroc, and your leadership team there. I know things change up at that level and have recently, but you've been in business for a long time too, so don't feel limited just to your current relationships. Feel free to expand on it from your career. Cause, correlation, but the background, the why, maybe some of the stories or some of the things that gave you like for me, like I said, I've just been told too many times correlation or I don't care. So that's where I'm coming from. But what about you?
Well, it's as I said earlier, one of the things in my mind when I looked at this topic was the issue of, so let's talk about what business performance really means. We know what it means in a traditional sense, but our customers, one of the things unique in the mining industry is the mining industry is very safety conscious, and they are overtly safety conscious. And we have a lot of customers in Australia, and Australia as a region and as an area is really intensely so for us, safety is something that we do because we are learning even from the best in the world that have that expectation. But when they come to us, they want to be sure, where do we stand on this? So when we see performance, we look at also things that relate to our company's ability to let people understand and know that we are a culture of safety. We're not talking about it, we're actually living it. And that starts with when they come in the door and the way we treat them regarding their safe behavior when they get in our facility. Anytime we give presentations, they're led with that. We've had a lot of people who have come to work for us and said, one of the things that sets you apart was, and I go back to the old Peter Bamford story, would you let your kid come and work here? They said, we realized in talking to your people in the organization that that's just part of who you are and not just looking at the numbers and looking at signage and looking at, selling it, but it is really intrinsically part of it. And so that excellence. So what is excellence? And I think the business performance that we see is the sustainability of our company in this area, because that's really an area where we have a cyclical business. So we know that already. We know there's going to be years and months where we don't sell a lot of capital equipment, but we know we're going to sell a lot of consumable equipment and service equipment. So we have to be on our game in all those areas as well. We have a lot of people in the field. So the excellence of that is really really a driver, becoming a driver to our business, to the point that one of the two major projects we have in our company right now going is related to safety and safe behavior, and that is what we're putting forth in our annual report and everything to show that that's what's going to drive our better performance as a company.
Well, and that, I think, again, my Tag, you can counter because you get to sum everybody up, Tag. But again, what I would take away from that, David, is that they know there is a great belief out there in terms of the correlation. That's what they're pushing. The overall, we do well with safety, and we know you believe that that's part of an excellent company, and you believe that correlation, right? Any further than that, they don't, they wouldn't necessarily. But I agree totally. Alex, if I could, you were talking before again about the, like with everything, right? Obviously, it's not static. Things move over time, right? So at the beginning, I would agree totally that all of them believe the correlation now. I don't think it's just about that the accidents cost money. I think most good managers know there's more than that. How much more than that is the question we're trying to get into here. And I think your point about, well, it starts off with correlation, but eventually they're curious, like, why is it correlated? and or not, right? So if they pursue the
Yeah.
curiosity, where does it go? And obviously, if they're apathetic, it's pretty obvious that it goes nowhere. But
Yeah.
go for
And
however.
I mean, what we did, Larry, I mean, at ETEX is we flipped it a little bit. We didn't say or even hypothesize that good safety causes good business performance. What we actually said very explicitly was we believe the same things that cause great safety results cause great, quote unquote, traditional business results. And we actually got very explicit about, at least within our environment, what does that mean to us, right? And for us, and these aren't sacred guidelines. These can be different for companies depending on your strategy, everything else. We focused on engagement, we focused on attention to detail, and we focused on turning things from ideas to action, right? A bias for action. So those three things, I think, are pretty inherent in driving good safety results. If you're doing those things, and if you have people engaged, and if you're, as Peg said, disciplined on your procedures and paying attention to detail, and if you're really taking action when action is needed, you're probably going to get good safety results. But you're also, those are the same drivers to get quality, to get productivity, to get your advancements in your factories, or even your business results. So that's the way we drove it, and we tried to do it. And it didn't matter where a factory was on the maturity standpoint, because it worked for everybody. And we had, like I said, a lot of different maturity levels, et cetera. And that's where it started to enable the leaders, and I did it from the top, or I do it from the top, to sort of come in with this message that we care about these things, we expect and we want this great safety performance, but we're not. And the added benefit, and this was always a nut that was hard for me to crack for a lot of places I've been, is everywhere I'd ever gone, there's always some type of tension between safety and the rest of the business. Do you want me to be safe, or do you want me to run more production? And this was a way, I think, to keep some coherency and say, guess what? We want both, but we get both by actually working on the input drivers that drive both of these, okay? And then turning those into very specifics. So it didn't absolve us from working on some very specific safety things like guarding and like Latoto and like the things that are very sort of germane to safety, but it allowed a coherency as far as the strategy and as far as how we're going about it, that I think let us explain it to people and keep some credibility, which is part of what we talked about on the KPIs. Right. So, I mean, I think that's where I think the causality can come into play, is really in that inputs.
Okay, well, I thank you very much, Alex, for that. And if you've been on these webinars before, you may recall Ed Stevens from ABB was one of the panelists. Unfortunately, his father got COVID, so he can't be with us today. But he went right out, like in terms of going at the cause. He went right out and started soliciting what is causing frustration in your workstation, in your work area, your job, your task. And within reason, we are going to try to get rid of that source of frustration. And he, if you will, I know that he made tremendous improvements in terms of safety just with that, specific lever, getting rid of that, right? Like, in other words, trying to get rid of the frustration. If he was on the show, he could tell us if they had, what happened with quality, what happened with reliability, all the rest of it that went on out there. But the idea quite often too is that if you had a fork truck driver, he backed off the loading dock and got seriously hurt, we would have an investigation, and with any luck at all, if it was a good company, they would go to root cause. But if that same guy in the shipping department shipped 150 skids, 3 truckloads of product to their second best customer instead of their best customer, I'm not so sure there'd be a root cause investigation, but I bet you they'd say, do that again and you're gone. Or if the guy'd done it a couple of times before, that would likely be the strike and you're out, but not necessarily any kind of root cause investigation to levels of fatigue, levels of rushing, how many years in terms of complacency, and how easy would it be for the labels to be misread. All of that sort of system looking at wouldn't necessarily have happened the same way as if it was an injury. So I find sometimes the levels of investigation are far behind safety when it comes to the rest of the organization, looking at cause actually and getting to the cause. But let me get to you, Dr. Wada. What would you say in terms of sort of the depth behind with the managers, the people you talk to, and everything like that? Do you try to get them to see, a real specific link between human error, human performance, safety performance, the overall business reliability, and can you actually get them to focus on the really high leverage things that way?
Well, I don't know. I guess, Larry, I'm going to be consistent and not answer your question and answer it in a different way.
Okay.
I'm see. Let me tell you something, Larry. At home, I think all
I'm
of us.
not even sure I asked the question the way I was supposed to. I didn't look at my notes. So go ahead. Go ahead, Wada.
That's,
Take
that's okay. It's okay.
one.
So my kids are expected to behave in a certain way in my house, right? And they're supposed to be respectful. They're supposed to be this. They're supposed to be nice to their siblings and not, beat them up all the time. They're supposed to be responsible. They're not supposed to set the house on fire. So they do a lot of things which are, which are safe behaviors. Also, we in the house and the kids also, and for example, the nannies, whatever, who are around the house, we all understand that we need to make sure that there's no unsafe conditions around the house. However, I don't have the Health and Safety at Work Act, plastered on the wall of my house, anywhere in the house. I don't have a safety policy stuck on the wall, or an HSE policy or whatever on the wall. It is understood. So we have some values. So I want to talk something about the difference between the values in the organization which drive the brand covenant and people actually becoming more connected to that brand, the employee engagement, the stakeholder kind of engagement and respect, the customer satisfaction, and all these lovely kind of things which improve productivity, efficiency, optimization of operations, improve general for an organization. However, so when we talk about KPIs, so let's get back now to back to reality, because we talk about values and we're going to have transparency and we're going to have we're going to have integrity and respect and love, and we're going to work together and everything in an organization. And the directors and the executives of an organization obviously sign off to those values because they're very humanistic. I mean, it's very they're very nice, they're very high values, but are they actually a reflection of truly a belief, or is it an aspiration that everybody in the organization should behave this way? So now put that to one side, what I've just said about the values and putting our values together. Then look at how we develop KPIs, because we started this whole conversation today talking about KPIs and talking about the correlation. So we're talking about a quantitative approach towards understanding performance, business performance, again against safety performance or HSE performance. How do we come up with the KPI? The KPI should be linked to a key result area. That key result area is actually coming from something called a value driver, and I'm using some terms that we use in a lot of companies, like the balanced scorecard and all that kind of stuff. And the value driver is driven by something called a strategic imperative. So there's some companies have about 5-6 strategic imperatives, and they're based on the strategy statement, which is the vision, mission, and all that kind of stuff. So the strategy gives you the strategic imperative, which gives you the value driver. The value driver then gives you the key result areas that you need to focus on, and then you measure the key result areas by KPIs. And when the KPIs go red, go south, you have a management intervention to try to improve them, right? So now remember what I talked about. So the values are on one side, right? And the strategy on one side. When I spoke about the strategy, and the strategic imperative, the value drivers and the KRAs and the KPIs and the management interventions. The values were never in that conversation of developing the strategy, right? They're more inherent in the organization's behaviors, right? In the way that things are done. It's more related to safety culture. It's more related to the psychological safety. It's more related to the human behaviors of the people within the organization. And that's why, when we go back to the question of correlation, we have to understand that organizations develop their strategies in a different way. Now, if it was a strategy of the organization to be more sustainable, to be more socially better as an organization, to be a more responsible organization, that was a strategic imperative. And that strategic imperative then was linked to all the KPIs that you had, be they HSE KPIs or whatever other social KPIs. Then you find some organizations which are like that. Not many, probably within oil and gas, mining, whatever, but many other organizations also have that. But even the oil and gas sector, the energy sector, the extraction, they're all moving towards that direction. And the reason for that is because sustainability is becoming part of the strategy. So I don't know, that obviously didn't answer your question at all, Larry, but I don't know.
Well,
I
don't,
hope it was useful anyway,
well, more like getting, I guess, right down to the, the nitty gritty of the human factors, the critical errors, the causation, and just that for so many of them, and it's natural, I think, because the legislation is so aimed at the hazards and the engineering, the guarding, the controlling of the hazards and the hierarchy of control, so that it's not like that it's balanced. That, well, yeah, I know, but even if that sprocket was unguarded, the person wouldn't likely put their finger right in it unless there was a mistake, because they're not trying to get hurt. So the idea that there's always an error, and then to just throw that away and say, yeah, human error is inevitable, instead of saying, well, wait a minute, look at all the coaching, all the sports in the world. I mean, it's improved human error on the playing field dramatically. Why can't we import some of that stuff into the work? Well, that thinking, all the rest of that stuff is finally happening. But again, I don't think from a management point of view, it's getting down to cause. And I'm not sure, even when I think about safety professionals out there, I'm not sure how comfortable a lot of them are moving beyond correlation or beyond just the ROI, like the accidents cost money and we save this much, we save this much money. I mean, one of the things you said in a previous show, David, was, if all else fails, you can always show them the millions of dollars, Larry. That seems to get their attention, and it seems to get them to move. Every time I've shown them $1 million, they seem to move in the direction I want, right? And we all kind of laugh, but that does certainly seem to work. Anyhow, Peter, let me come to you
No.
And get you to talk a bit. Oh God, every time I come to Peter, his internet disappears. And now, Ted,
He doesn't like going last, but that's ridiculous.
Hey, listen, Larry. Larry, whilst we try to get Peter back, I want to tell you something. Once I wanted to demonstrate something to my HSC team when I was HSC director some years ago. I wanted to demonstrate to them that statistics. There's as Benjamin Disraeli said, there's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. And I used the same set of data, and I did this study in one of the small terminals, and we tried to correlate, what are the things that are driving safety culture and all this kind of business. Anyway, long story short, and then all I did is, to try to prove this correlation, I said the hypothesis is that if we get a score of 90% and above, that means there's a positive correlation. And then all I did is I took the same set of data and I took an average, right? I took averages, but on one set of averages, I used what we call a median average, right?
Right.
And on the other set of data, I used a mean average, right? And Teg would know about this because he worked a lot with this kind of stuff when in his previous life, right? And I could show just by changing the type of statistic, the descriptive statistic, I have a median to mean, I was able to show that the correlation is completely different. So, it's what you want to do with the numbers. The numbers don't really mean anything unless you really look at them very, very qualitatively. So you have got to look at things
Yeah,
qualitatively. You
you've
can't.
also, I mean, I started this off, I mean, doing statistical process control training for the automotive industry in the early 80s. And, since safety and quality are the same, they figured, we'll get Larry to do the safety training. And I didn't realize about that emotional difference component until I was getting riddled full of holes the first time I was on stage going, whoa, wait a minute. This seems to be a little different than when you're talking about quality to the people. But the first thing is the variation within statistical control, or you're just chasing ghosts, right? That's one thing. And then the next thing is regression to the mean, right? In other words, you're almost always going to get regression to the mean, and you're going to think that there's some sort of cause when it's actually just natural that if you did really well last year, you probably won't do as well next year, right? It's the great, like in Daniel Kahneman's book, he says the great thing about being the sports announcer, you can say the guy who came last, he's got nothing to lose. He's likely going to do really well in his second jump. And the guy who came first is like, well, chances are he's going to be a little cautious. He probably won't do as well. And statistically, as the announcer, you're going to be right almost every time because of regression to the mean, right? But it isn't. Back to what you were saying, Wada, in the storks, it's not cause, right? It's not a cause that you can then go push a lever and get a more predictable, beneficial result. Peter, I'll never let you go last again, I promise, okay? Because, it doesn't seem to work well with your internet there. But
Here, I apologize.
oh, it happens. It is the way it is. But just tell us a bit, maybe more, if you could get into the depth, some of the conversations and anecdote with the executives, managers, either American Electric or anywhere else in your career, would you say they think it's cause correlation? Why? Give us the background where they would be coming from, or where your experience with them, Peter.
Sure, Larry. So I think that, to have the conversation, is it cause or correlation? Most of the savvy leaders that I talk to really don't care. They see the value of integrating safety into their business processes. And just a few quick examples that I wanted to give. Let's say that we're operating a manufacturing line, Larry, and our business outcome, our product is based on that line running at a certain capacity factor. But periodically, we've got to take that line down to fix it, whether it's a power plant or a manufacturing line. And so, this is almost, cliche, but we need to get that back online. So our decisions being made to favor getting that done quickly or getting it done quickly and safely. And I think that the savvy leaders are leading that so that those things are integrated together, right? Because we know if we have an accident or an injury while that line is down, while we're doing the maintenance, our schedule is going to be off, our budget's going to be off, and we're not going to get it back online. So that's going to affect everything. Kind of on the other side of that, if we have a line that's constantly being upset for whatever reason, then that's kind of putting our people into harm's way more often than we may like to do that. So if we have to, continually lock something out, fix a jam in a machine, or do something that, needs to be tweaked to get that machine operating properly again, the more often that happens, the more likely people are to make a bad decision about how they're going to do that. They may rely on an interlock.
Likely that happens, the more they will be inclined to become frustrated and rush. I mean, I've seen it in front of my eyes with a kid.
On that interlock, I don't have to lock it out. So you've got that aspect of it, right? Another one, when I look at really good performing organizations, they integrate their processes together, safety, quality, production. And a real good example that you started to talk about would be incident investigation. Do a lot of businesses have a separate incident investigation process standard for production and quality upsets, and then a second one?
Uh-oh. Did you guys all see Pete freeze like I did?
Yes,
Yeah.
Houston, we have a
Yeah.
problem.
He didn't disappear this time. He's just very shy.
But he at least he froze in a not like at least he didn't freeze in one of those, deer in the headlights poses.
Oh,
That would
yeah.
have really been unflattering. Tag, so what like this what I was trying to get at with Peter here, like a bit of it is it's caused in order to get to the cause, you've got to get to the rushing, the frustration, fatigue, the complacency, the
Yeah.
human factors that are causing it to push on those levers, alleviate those levers, and so those barriers, if you will, or those causes. So to get down to that level, and I think they understand about like the rushing, like the turnarounds, like Peter was saying, you've got a 2-week turnaround for a power plant. But I don't think they'd, if you ask them why do people rush, they'll say poor planning. But I don't know anybody that ever plans to rush. But if you make a mistake, like get halfway to the airport and you realize you forgot your laptop, you're going to be rushing now, whether you like it or not. So
Right.
quite often, unexpected errors cause delays that nobody could foresee, but you can't budget another 20% in your contract because our guys screw up a lot when they get tired because you'll never get the contract. So it's a bit of where I'm going with this, but Teg, what if you were looking at the general lay of the land, and I said, okay, so how many of them have sort of moved to cause? How many of them are just correlation, 50-50, 70-30, 80-20, 90-10? Well, anything like that you'd feel comfortable throwing out?
No. it's a simple answer, but I think Pete kind of said, does it matter, right? In the sense that he's also said the value is obvious, right? And everything that we've been listening to all the way through this, I'm going to talk about what a stork's bit in a minute, I imagine, but everything we're talking about organizations that are functioning really, really well. If we look at some of the stuff that's been mentioned, you sort of earlier on, for example, we talked about David and performance. What does it mean, right? So he talked about the ability to live without question. So you're clear about what you're looking at and how you're looking at it, how you're addressing it. And then Alex built on that beautifully, I thought, when he talked about engagement, attention to detail, ideas to action, and discipline. And if you think about those things, and you think about transformational leadership, and you think about what we want our leaders to do, and that's a great chunk of that. So is it cause or correlation? It's definitely, to me as a civilian for a minute, it's definitely part of the cause. It might not be in its entirety, right? But it's a chunk of it. And if it's a chunk of it, it's something that we should look at, and it's something that we need to address and we need to integrate, right? We talked about discipline. Now, if you think about discipline the other way around, because sometimes you can answer questions in reverse, right? And this goes up to Pete's point at the end and your point that you were making a minute ago about when people get frustrated about things, right? If you think about when people are not disciplined in work in terms of following procedure and looking at what they're doing, that's when we get organizational drift, behavioral drift. We start, our rules become a little bit more flexible and a little bit flabbier. Okay, and that's when we start to get problems. So to Pete's point at the end, then to your point, that if we a good safety system, if we have a piece of machinery that isn't working properly, or people are getting frustrated, they're getting angry with things because it's not functioning the way, the systems that we have need to be able to capture that information. The organization needs to be able to respond to that information correctly, to take away that exposure, take away that risk, to make it easy for them. That's just a good safety system. That's good business. And that's how you stop these problems from happening. Does it mean that You're sometimes going to lose 5 minutes on a job or 10 minutes on a job because you're doing things safely. Yes, but in the long run, you're going to win because of it, and your quality is going to win because of it. Your organization is going to function much more effectively. That's kind of where I was. I never did get to.
That requires faith. Yeah, that requires faith.
Yes, it requires. And sorry, that was the one thing I actually circled. It. Belief was the word that you used, actually, and you can tell the difference. So we mentioned values, we mentioned passion, we've mentioned belief, and but I think belief is actually the word, because you can have values written on a wall, right? But
But
unless you believe, it doesn't mean that you follow them, right?
well,
And once you start following me,
I think this is the Teg, I think this is actually the essence of it all, though, in it that you want people to believe, but it's got to be more than faith for some people. They've got to be able to, see cause and effect. And I remember, Alex, when we first started doing the expert panel webinars in Europe, Alex was on with Alistair McCubbin, and Alistair is from Outokumpu stainless steel. And what Alistair said was that so often what we're presenting to managers is it's like the magician's carpet, or he said it's like you push this effort into the front end of the pipe, and if we do enough of that, what we're hoping is that very little or zero harm will come out the end of the pipe, but we can't really see the gearworks inside the pipe. And he said, what SafeStart did for us is it's like taking the curtain off, and you actually see how the magician pulls the rabbit out of the hat, and it's not magic. It's just these 4 states, these 4 errors. So now let's go remove the cause, right? Of which, you got to understand that, somebody's having problems with their marriage at home. You as a company can only shoulder so much of that burden, right? There will be frustration. So it's personal, it's company. There's a collective responsibility on the causes. But I know so many managers that come from an engineering background, plant managers, and if you can't really show them cause and effect, but you're asking them to show faith and belief in something, it's not that they're against safety, but if you could show them the cause effect versus just overall correlation, it would be so much easier to get their support. And so, I've spent a lot of time.
Larry, at one point there has to be a leadership understanding or commitment for it, because just even as subtle as we talked about the times when safety shuts down a job or slows down a job, and there's a big difference between a leader who sees that as, oh, I've lost productivity, versus the leader who sees it as, my great safety culture just identified a defect in my productivity system that I can now go and fix.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you keep letting that thing happen and you're letting it be unsafe, it's gonna fail for a different reason, even if somebody doesn't get hurt. So beyond everything we've talked about, there does have to be a leadership understanding of it, to even take that leap to understanding the causality of it. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like to get the whole chain of events to start in the first place, to go back to, I think what David and Dr. Wada was saying, you have to actually kind of have to come back to the values, because without that, you're not going to have the concern or the care to bother starting to find the path or the trail to cause, so that you can obviously make your improvements much more systematically, as opposed to, like I said, that sort of I'll throw a whole bunch of commitment at the wall. I'll hope whatever sticks. And my strategy is that I will throw as much as I can, and we'll likely end up with very good safety performance.
Hey, Larry, that's by the way, that's the way that you make good pasta, You make it tough cooked. You throw it on the wall. If it sticks, it's good pasta, man. It's ready to eat, Al dente,
Well, I mean, I think so. I mean, and I'm not, I understand too that you don't like, in my job, I mean, I don't get into the tax laws of every country in Latin America and Asia either. I can't get into the granular level of every aspect of our business. And part of it is that, I have appetite for certain aspects beyond what I have for actually knowing what transfer taxes are from Brazil to Colombia, right? But we do need to know all that, or else we pay 30% every time. So, you know, I think fair enough for a lot of these managers as well too, right? You know, they got to know a lot of things up there, and they can't possibly know everything. But I don't think if we just leave it at correlation, I think we've left it a little bit short, because you're asking for too much faith from some people without you've got to show them those gear works. Like I said, like Alistair said, you got to take the curtain away, and then you can get their support. Peter, if you can, just to close it out for us, because we're running right out of time. What would you say with the executives and managers you've met? Like, you know, give us an anecdote or a story about, you know, where they would be in general cause correlation, and feel free, like Teg was saying, to, you know, to comment a bit on the overall level of care or apathy.
Here we go again.
Oh my God! Every time maybe I just got to learn how really short questions, Peter. Well, look,
We're squarely into cause mode now, Larry. 3 times.
yeah, really.
I think his unmute button is freezing him apparently.
No, there is a cause. Well, listen, gentlemen, thank you very, very much. First of all, for this conversation. I really appreciate it. And if you can, everybody, in I was going to say, we are 1, 2, 3 on the 10th of December. We will have another expert panel here in North America, exactly the same time. Now, this one is going to be injury prevention strategies for young workers and old workers. How do you deal with the two highest risk injury categories? And as some of you know, I've been doing a fair bit of what you call research, digging into fatal injury reports, looking into the theory of serious injuries and fatalities, and about how often a reflex would have prevented it or significantly lessened it. There is nothing like reading through 300-400 fatal injury reports to really make you feel blue. But anyhow, the other thing that came across loud and clear, although I've always known it, was just how many of the fatalities are less than 7 years of experience and people over 55 years old. Like really, really over 55 years old is more than 50% of the fatalities. But you can't have different rules and different procedures for old people and young workers. But I think we all know that the way you talk to somebody who's been with you for 15 days is a little different than somebody who's been with you for 15 years. So if you can please join us for that, what we are looking for, gentlemen, are what's worked for you, like with the old workers and the young workers, dealing with those two high risk categories where obviously you can't deal with it with rules, procedures, and quite frankly, a paper safety management system. It's different. It's different people, really different risks, different human factors that are causing the things. I think we'd all agree, you only been on the job 15 days. You're probably not as complacent as someone who's been there journeyman 71 years old kind of thing, right? So hopefully you can all join us. That is December the 10th. It will be at 10 p.m. in United Arab Emirates, everybody. No, just kidding. 10 a.m. BC time, 1 a.m. Eastern. And if you are tuning in from the Gulf region, and we've got a lot of friends now in the Gulf region, but if you are tuning in from the Gulf region, that will be at 10 p.m. in the Gulf region. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much for this this discussion. Hopefully we'll see you December 10th as well, if you can make it. Okay, bye-bye.
Sorry, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.